Hello, my name is Jim Robb, and I'm the president of the National Training and Simulation Association, NTSA. So welcome to our August webinar, which has the theme, International Partners Giving Their Views on the Pandemic. Additionally, the second part, we're going to do a preview of ITEC 2022. As some background, Clarion Defence and Security and NTSA organize the International Training Technology Exhibition and Conference each year held in Europe. The event unfortunately was canceled last year, and this year had to be postponed until next April. So we're using this webinar as somewhat of a continuity method to keep everybody involved and updated on what's going on here and in Europe. We have a great set of panelists on board that have your questions that you provide in advance, and there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions in real time through the chat. So due to respect for the panel's time, we will try to keep this session under an hour. So let me now introduce our moderator, Gary Waterfall, who's the Senior Defense Advisor for Clarion Defence and Security. Gary served with the Royal Air Force for 34 years, retiring as an Air Vice Marshal. I always wanted to be an Air Vice Marshal. His time with the RAF included multiple leadership roles, and he also served as a team pilot for the Red Arrows. Upon his retirement in 2019, Gary turned to advising and mentoring across the leadership, defense, and aerospace sectors, working inside and outside. And he joined Clarion in the middle of last year. So we welcome him, and we thank you all for attending. And Gary, let me turn it over to you.
Hey, Jim, thanks very much. It's really good to see you again, my friend, again in the virtual world, which is really a theme for this afternoon. And I really hope that one day soon, I believe in November, we'll finally get to meet face to face. I'm very much looking forward to that. Thank you very much for the kind words and for the introduction. So as Jim said, my name is Gary Waterfall, and I'm the Senior Defence Advisor for Clarion Defence and Security. Right now, pretty much heads down because we've got DSEI, which is a large exhibition in the Excel running next month, 14th to 17th of September. But we're not here to talk about this. We're actually here, quite rightly, to talk about the impact of the pandemic and how it's been on our international modelling, simulation and training market. And we also want to spend a bit of time looking forward to ITEC 22 in London, which is going to be held in the Excel as well. So we've got just short of 60 minutes to sort of unpack those two subjects we can. Clearly from me as a moderator, it's not going to be my job to provide the intellect. I'm just here to steer and guide the discussion. And I'm really lucky to have a really sort of distinguished panel of 4 to help me. And what I'm going to do is just introduce each one of them in turn. And then I'm just going to ask them, if they can, just to reflect, because you always see the world from where you sit, as one of my great military leaders said. And it's really good, I think, to get each of their view on how the world's been for them over the last 18 months and what the impact has been on their area of business, or indeed how they see the impact, how it's sort of rationalized and played out in the industry, both in the military and the civil sector. First up is Russ Mohammed. He's the ITEC 22 chairperson, so we'll be hearing lots from him later. But he's also Senior Vice President Sales for the Middle East and Africa for Bohemia Interactive Simulations. And he's been leading all of these sales and business development activities since 2014. Russ Matt's got a wealth of business experience in defence for projects for armies and air forces and both the civil and military training and simulation. Russ Matt, good day and welcome. Thanks very much for joining us.
Good morning, good afternoon. If anyone is east of me, good evening.
Hey, thanks, Russ Matt. Next, we have Kwok Wong. Kwok is the Senior Systems Engineer for Plexus UK. He's a synthetic environment specialist, and he's got 3 decades. There's a recurring theme here for all of us, I think. 3 decades of experience in the field of modelling and simulation, including extensive expertise in the development of the synthetic environment solutions across LVC concepts to meet the customer requirements. Kwok, a warm welcome to you today. And it's the old, you're on mute, I'm afraid. Never mind. We'll talk to you later, Kwok. If I can now go to
apologies.
Richard. There we go, no worries at all. Richard, a warm welcome to you, the Director of Partnerships for Defence and National Security for Improbable. You've been responsible for developing Improbable's industry and research partnerships, as well as driving the expansion of the partner content ecosystem. And I know that's relatively just the last couple of years, but before that, you were heading up the US government business, which you established and drove forward. Really warm welcome to you today, Richard, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, Gary. Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here today and look forward to a really good discussion.
Great. Thanks, Richard. And last but by no means least is Alex Harvey, who's the Creative Director for River, Reality in Virtual Reality, and he's also ITEC's tech partner in terms of River when we look forward to ITEC 22. Now, Alex, he comes today, he's got a massively deep understanding of the games industry, which I think is really topical and relevant in how we're taking forward the synthetic and the training in the defence and the security sector as well. And he's worked on commissions for the BBC and Ford Motor Company, just to name but two. So Alex, a really warm welcome to you today, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, good to be here, and lots to talk about with the new tech that's been sort of overcoming us quite a lot over the last sort of 18 months. Things have moved on a lot since the last ITEC.
It absolutely has, and I'll be the first to admit there are many of these virtual channels that I myself didn't recognise 2 years ago. And we've all moved quite quickly into this virtual world. I think if I can, Richard, can I just come back to you first of all, please, just to tell me, you see the world from where you sit. How's the last 18 months been for you? What have you seen in terms of the industry approach and your own approach, actually, as well as the customer? And how can you take that looking forward?
Yeah, with pleasure, Gary. Thanks a lot. So, I mean, as you mentioned, Improbable's fairly young business, certainly young by the standards of this industry, where there's been many years of excellent work in this area, and so we're still learning what normal looks like. But for those that don't know what we do, because we are new, we provide a collaborative synthetic environment development platform, which is designed to enable our industry partners to create, deploy, and evolve a new class of multi-role, multi-domain synthetic environment solutions. We're all about enabling industry to work together to deliver the capability that our customers need to respond to the complex modern operating environment. And I think the last 18 months with the pandemic has really brought into sharp relief the importance of modeling and simulation to the modern world. It's been a real joy to see how central modeling has been to understanding, forecasting, and planning how we respond to something which we hoped we never would have to do so. And so I think we need to build on that opportunity now as an industry to see how can we really push forward how modeling and simulation can be central to the way organizations from defense and more broadly can plan, respond, experiment, learn, and prepare for future unexpected crises and challenges. So there are kind of three key themes that I reflected on in preparing for this. One is that the last 18 months showed that we need to be really well prepared to adapt and respond to a fast changing environment. That's both in the global kind of environmental context that COVID triggered, but also in the threats and the challenges that our customers and industry face. So we really are looking to work with industry and with government to see how we can increase the speed at which we can adapt and respond to these emerging needs and challenges, to develop capabilities more quickly, to evolve them, to sustain them and adapt them, and to really help the customer have the tools and the next generation capabilities they need to respond at speed in this complex environment. Secondly is really about the flexibility required and the resilience required to respond to the unexpected. There's a lot of overlap between these themes, but here I'm really talking about how we as industry collaborate, how we operate, how we deliver, how do we make sure that we're not impacted by the requirement to be locked down and not be able to work together. And that's going to be really important for our customers. And so again, I'm lucky in that working for Improbable, I believe a development platform that is cloud agnostic is a really powerful tool to bring together industry, to allow us to continue to work in remote, disparate ways, but to ensure the benefits of that cloud technology are brought to bear in our sector through benefits like continuous improvement and deployment. But there's many ways in which really leveraging the best that technology has can help us move fast and work together effectively. And then that lastly brings me on to my last theme, which is how can we collaborate more effectively together, reduce the barriers to that when we can't get together physically. I think video conferencing has been really powerful, but let's get the technology and the tools in place that really remove the barriers and enable a kind of real burgeoning of industry collaboration to produce a whole that is greater than the sum of the parts. And that's really what drives Improbable. That's the ethos behind our development platform approach. Yeah, interested to hear the views of my colleagues on the panel, some of whom we've worked with through this model very effectively. Yeah, thanks, Gary.
Hey, Richard, thanks very much. I definitely, I'll come back to you on one point, and I'll throw it out to the panel, probably ask Alex to answer it first once we've done the introductions, which is, has collaboration got closer or further away through the pandemic and in the ways that I've been working? But we'll come to that in a moment. Perhaps, Kwok, if I can turn to you next, please, just to you see the world again from where you sit. How has the journey been over the last 18 months for you?
Thanks, Harry. Yeah, it's been an interesting one because for me personally, I actually moved jobs in February 2020, and just before the lockdown started, and it wasn't something that I had planned for, and nobody planned for that. I guess it's one of those things that happen, and for me, there was a level of uncertainty, but that was soon dispelled once I joined Plexus and worked with the company, and we all evolved really rapidly, certainly from Plexus perspective, because our company predominantly is in US. We have a UK arm, which really just got established firmly last year, and then there's Australia as well. And we as a company had to adapt quite quickly and also move to remote learning for most of the staff. Pretty much everybody was in lockdown, and we tried to continue our business as much as possible. And thankfully, working with our customer, we were able to achieve a lot of our kind of discussion negotiation, because at the same time, just before the lockdown, we were asked to bid the E3D continuation delivery over in RAF Waddington. And that was an interesting process because, we were doing everything remotely via video conferences, teleconferences, exchange of emails, voicemails, and so on and so forth, to try and understand the requirements from the customer from our perspective, and for them to understand our solution once we submitted our proposal, and then going through all of the negotiations and contract kind of processes as well. And at the same time, we also found that it did cause a level of delay, not a great deal of delay. I think only a slightly longer than I would expected from a usual contractual mechanism. And eventually we were under contract and started to deliver the system. One of the interesting things is, although remote working is fine for most of the activities, but when you're in defense, some of the systems, it's just not possible. So the customer reacted quite well, and the user community gave us support and identified us as key workers. So we were still able to travel and support the facilities at Waddington, where we have the trainer delivering the services to the armed forces. So that was one bonus in a way, and also how quickly the company and the community kind of got together and worked out a solution. The other thing I really learned through lockdown is how to actually, manage my time a little bit better, because that's always been one of those challenges when you're working from home and remotely, is how do you actually, distinguish between, when your work starts and when your work actually finish, because that is a real challenge. And at the beginning, I find myself almost, it's a blur during the day. It's almost working longer than I expected without really realizing it, because things were happening and we were all doing stuff, and the customer were kind of also working quite long hours, to be honest. And so they were asking us questions and we were just responding. And then next thing I know, and because I'm also working as part of an international company, so the time zone is always a challenge. So certainly there's a lot to reflect back on for myself and for our company, and we have learned a lot through this journey.
Hey, Kwok, thanks very much. And I smile and reflect because a great small tactical point for me is we've got an hour for this slot, and if we use an hour for this slot, I can absolutely put good money on the fact a whole number of people that are spending an hour listening to us and watching us will have an appointment that starts on the next hour, because that's how it is, and everyone's booked that way. And we will endeavour to finish a few minutes early to allow people to get in a beverage and to visit the restrooms, etc. Because that's just something that I've learned through all this. But absolutely buy into all of your points. Russ, Matt, can I turn to you now, please? Again, you see the world from where you sit. Would you describe the pandemic as impeding or being a helpful accelerant in places?
Gary, I would say both. I personally think that everything, all kinds of things that look like a setback, and no one can say the pandemic is not a setback, are also an opportunity. And I think everybody's embraced that. Everyone's got a huge Zoom account using Microsoft Teams and so on. So, of course, not being able to visit people, not being able to hold ITEC and ITSEC is very different, but it really does allow us to explore other ways. I think are going to be complementary in the future. I like what Kwok said about the way to organize things. The thing I really missed was good coffee. So I've had to up my coffee tech during the pandemic stuff and invest in that. And I now make a mean cappuccino. So if I ever see you, I'm probably going to buy you a cappuccino, and we'll talk about that as a precursor. As part of that, we've had to, in terms of taking the opportunities for the pandemic presented, we, like everybody else, I think, had to find a way of reaching our customers. So now what we do is we hold twice yearly tech conferences, which run over 2 days, not a full 2 days. We've got one in September again, as a way of reaching out to people. And that's proved really effective. So we've had to think like non-traditional defense companies. We've had to think like internet consumer companies and the ways of reaching people. The other thing that we've done is we've realized that people couldn't train from us. So we've had to do things like weekly instructional webinars. So instead of people coming to us for a course or us physically sending an instructor, we do it online with quite a large community, which is building to really quite a large worldwide community in Australian, European, and American time zones every week to provide that content that you can't get. So thank you to customers for getting up early or getting up late to do that. But I think we've managed to plow on through all of that. I think from the industry point of view, if you like looking outwards and the customer, I think there are 4 or 5 things that have happened in the pandemic. The most important is that people have had to train in spite of the pandemic. And they've really turned to training through simulation of any kind. And I'm going to quote Major General Maria Gervais, who's quite well known because she's director of the synthetic training environment for the US Army Futures Command. And she has said, because of COVID-19, what we've had to experience over the past 3 to 4 months, we've understood now the power of distributed learning, training, and connection, and also the power of what the synthetic training environment can deliver to our Army. So in the House of Commons, I would not be allowed to quote, but I'm hoping on a Clarion NTSA webinar I can quote, because she has very succinctly expressed the power that we think we can now bring to people as an industry, as Rich, for example, as Kwok have described. And that is really the change, people training in spite of. And the way that's led is to a real understanding that training needs to be interconnected, as Rich has said. It needs to be really robust, and it needs to be really accessible. And things like VR and MR make that, and Alex will know this, really make the training accessible. You don't need to bring everyone to the training location anymore, which is fabulously complicated, but you can train at home if necessary or locally. So I think that's a really, really great change. The other thing, of course, is it's accelerated the future. And I think that's one of the things when we talk about ITEC later on, I'm really excited about, because all the things that we said, oh, they're nearly on the horizon. Hey, some of them already happened. So we're already kind of 1.5 stages further than we would have been otherwise. That's kind of my little summary, Gary.
Russ, that's great, thanks. And just picking up that last point, the accelerant. It absolutely has been accelerant for change in so many areas due to the pandemic. We're very good at innovating and iterating our way in the way that we put behaviours online in terms of meetings. And I'll come back to you actually about online conferences in a moment in one of the questions we've got for cameras, Matt. But I absolutely think there's a lot of great advantages that have come out of it. But we need to make sure that we're taking only the good bits out of it as we move back into this live environment, and we shouldn't throw away that skill. And it's interesting, some of the distributed training, I know, quite some of the work that you're doing, once you distribute that training on the E3, once you expand that out globally, as yet, there are two things we haven't quite mastered, and I wish we could. One is getting faster than the speed of light in terms of that connectivity. And the other one is actually getting the world to stop spinning. And you've all talked about having conferences that are going around the world. What we can't get away from, of course, are time zones. And it's unsociable for some in a live environment. Here we are in the afternoon and we're talking to the States in the morning. And certainly for us, looking at DSEI, that's one area clearly from getting people in the virtual. If they're coming from abroad, then they've got to work with their own time zone. It's a little bit unsociable. But thank you, Russ. That's been brilliant. Alex, if I can just last and not least, from the world from where you sit, and I get to you is this business of collaboration. Has the pandemic been an accelerant in the industry perspective, or has it or have people retreated behind their desktops?
No, for us, so the company, there's like 16 of us now, and we make VR training for the blue light services all around the world. And just as we went into the pandemic, we were dealing with American government agencies to roll out training to their staff. So we've basically been 18 months in a pipeline where they've been testing our technology. There hasn't just been, we've now seen the biggest growth. So the biggest 18 months growth for our kits, I've seen the massive increase in them. So the River Link kits, which we're sending out now, this is a training system that any company can use. And we're looking at all the airports in America with a government agency announcement, hopefully in a couple of weeks. The fact that they can now take this box of headsets with 15 headsets in it, and they can put their own content onto it, film it themselves. We train them how to do it. This is now being deployed everywhere. So we're now putting this into UK military, police, fire, Aramco, different government departments. It's now not a case of, is VR a thing that we're using? I could give you 50 different massive companies that are using Riverlink already, and they're shooting their own content. I think we're a little bit different to some of the other training companies that are out there. We are enabling each company to make their own, because VR needs to be made bespoke for the company. There's no one solution unless you're doing fire extinguisher training, which is good. Let's do, you can do that. Everyone needs their own thing, scanning or creating. So we give them the ability to film it in 360 video. The army are doing this, just running around and filming exercises. And then the next day or the same day, putting it onto our classroom solution, allow them to train in the classroom. The beauty there is that for the last 2 years, people have been training remotely. They send the headsets home with the employees. They log on to their internet connections, and they have the same immersive experience done by a tutor over the internet. So it's basically two ways to use it. And that's one of our products. The other is room scale photorealistic interactive environments, which we make for UK, US government, and we make fire investigation and crime scene. But the major product, 3 degrees of freedom and 360 video, I've seen the pandemic increase it the most I've ever seen. So we've got to say that's good. But obviously the pandemic's not good. So
Alex, that's great, and the message I take there has actually been accelerant in terms of collaboration and needed. And I've got examples from a Boeing perspective of people going out in Australia, servicing the airplane through VR and reaching back actually to Boeing in the US to get the instant readout of what's going on. A real way of harnessing the technology. That's brilliant, Alex. Thank you so much for that. Richard, can I come to you really in terms of questions that we've had? And this is really, and the work you're doing particularly, has the pandemic impacted the way that military forces want and need to train their people? and the shift to distributed trainings, restriction on travel, etc. What have you seen, and what do you think is going to endure as hopefully we emerge from the pandemic? And Richard, if you kind of unpack that, and I'd really welcome the panel's views on that as well.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, I think it comes back to, we've been very privileged to be working closely with the British Army on their collective training transformation program. And I think a lot of the direction of travel they had already set on this. The pandemic has acted as an accelerant, again, as we were talking about earlier. I'd love to hear all the panel's views, but particularly Russ, Matt, he's got a lot more experience than I. But what I've observed in the last 18 months is that there is that demand for the ability to train anywhere, a more flexible deployment, easier deployment. You can connect from anywhere. We've been lucky to do in the last 12 months some really interesting work where we're stitching together through the synthetic environment development platform different training experiences, blending live, virtual, and constructive, even though they're distributed into a kind of stitched together single training environment. And that's offers some really exciting opportunities for how you connect people wherever they may be, how you maintain that continuity in times of challenge. The location where they can go to train obviously has been impacted very severely, and so they want to be able to, in a virtual way or synthetic environment, train and prepare for any operating environment. So the challenge we have is how do we create those rich representative operating environments very quickly, very economically, and to represent anywhere in the world. And I know there's obviously the US Army Synthetic Training Environment Program is attacking this problem as well. So we've got two major programs really going after this, but it's important. Our perspective on that is one of the ways you're going to achieve that is to really enable the integration of a range of industry capabilities to quickly compose and assemble these environments. And that's why it's really important to open up the marketplace to allow those really good providers, but also some niche providers to start to play their part. And it's about moving beyond just military training. As we've seen, the military needs to operate in an all-domain environment that represents civil, political, environmental factors as well. So this is a broad coalition needs to come together to make that a reality. And that's kind of the major demand pool. And the last thing I would say is once you're producing all of that in a synthetic environment and your soldiers are using it and training in all the ways they do, that's producing huge amounts of data. And so rightly, the military want to harness that data. It's a kind of a new level of data. How can they use that to be smarter, to be more effective, and to improve training outcomes? And I think, as I say, that's all been accelerated by the pandemic, and it's only going to get stronger, the demand from that going forward.
Yeah, Rich, I think the whole of government approach, if you like, from a training perspective, one of the advantages of moving into the synthetic, because on a live exercise, it is always difficult to get different arms of government to play their part just because of priorities in other areas. Whereas actually through effective use modeling simulation, you can start to bring some of that role play, as it were, to the front more than you could have done hitherto, which I think is an advantage. But Russ, Matt, I'd be interested to get your take on what Rich has just said there and your views.
I agree that the way Richard's put it, it's carrying on some of these particular things. So the two of the points that I mentioned earlier about robustness and accessibility, those are the things that are going to endure, as well as what Richard was talking about was this kind of interconnectedness. We think that interconnectedness is really accelerating with what you could call convergence. So what's the difference between interconnection and convergence, you ask? Interconnection is you have a bunch of different systems, they look and feel different, but they talk to each other. Convergence is you're in some kind of user interface, laptop or whatever, but you don't know which system you're in, because it could be a large scale simulation training, it could be a very micro, or you could swap between them. It will choose the right level of simulation and training for your need at the time. So that's something that's come out of this, and I think that's accelerated, but the robustness, interconnectivity and so on will endure. So much so that there's almost a gate. Armies, I think, are thinking there's a gate. You pass the gate of being able to do it, sat behind a desktop in some comfort, repeating and learning until you get it right, and then you go out and do it for real. Because think about it, armies couldn't train all the training estate everywhere is booked up because of the training backlog. So to get to where they needed to be in the first place, you've got to make the most of that live training. And I think one of the things that will endure of this is that live training is no longer kind of a right. It's something you earn, and it polishes off what you've learned before. And you will see some armies have actually written that as a policy statement, which is very, very powerful. So I think there's some really exciting things that have come from that, which take the awareness of simulation that armies generally and air forces, of course, and navies already had, but has really brought it up to the attention of the chiefs of staff.
Yeah, and Rusmat, I think I always talk about the 4 C's when I talk about simulation, and the first was kind of the cost, which drove us into the synthetic environment because of the cost of real platforms. I then really talk about the capability that some of the high-tech systems, particularly the 5th Gen Air Force, you probably don't want to be showing that capability in the real environment, and you want to use it in synthetic. The next is complexity, in terms of being able to intertwine so many of these systems together, which you couldn't do on a standard day. And the last C, I think, is coming, and it's really forcing itself into view, and that is that of climate. And you've just talked about, the need to do the live training, but it's going to be the right, and you'll have earned it. But there's always going to be now, quite rightly, the climatic factor, the environmental, the sustainability. And wherever you can, you shouldn't be doing the live training, because it's no longer acceptable to have Challenger tanks on Salton Plain or to have typhoons in the air if you don't need them and there's a better way to train. And I think that's really helping the industry accelerate the way forward. And again, I think the pandemic has done that as well, which has been really useful. Can I sort of come to you just to pick up any points that Richard and Rusmat have made, then also kind of stay with you and ask, probably with your E3D hat on, about has the pandemic had what impacts it had on your programs in terms of working between industry and government, being with the inability to actually work face to face, as it were.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, certainly. I agree with all the points that both Rusmat and Richard made. And one of the things, training, as Richard stated, there's still an appetite for it, but the shape of that training has changed. In terms of during the pandemic, a lot of the live training has ceased where it's not necessary. So hence the pressures more on the synthetics, because that's the only way they can train. And hence my earlier statement about us within Plexus being made a key worker, because we need to support the continuation training of the E3D in order to provide that service to the customer. And a couple of other points I wanted to make around those kind of changes is also, in addition to all the things Rusmat and Richard said, I think the other important bit is actually sharing of knowledge and learning lessons throughout all these, and be able to convert those into meaningful ways that we can do business together, both in industry as well as with our customers, whether it's nationally or globally. And the other one is a bit of a culture change, because people need to embrace technology a lot more than they used to, and understand there are other ways of delivering training. And like Rusmat was saying about live training is no longer a right, it needs to be earned. Equally, we need to understand what the blend is that need to enable our forces to be ready to do whatever faces them in future, whether it is, the current war or future conflict. So, but going back to the E3D in terms of challenges, as I mentioned earlier, we had to do a lot of our contractual process remotely, and we also had to change of customer in between the contract negotiation and then the delivery phase. And all through that, some of the people we do know, through previous connections and such like, there were other new faces that we have never met before. And despite all the technology, sometimes we don't always have video capabilities, always just listen to other people on the phone. And one of the things that I kind of found quite funny is even on the customer side, because even throughout this pandemic, they have movement of staff. So some of the teams have never seen each other. So one of the opportunities they had was earlier this year, where they were visiting the facility at Waddington, and then one of the customer, heard one of his boss and didn't even know who he was at the time, because they've only spoken on the phone, never seen each other. So that face-to-face and human contact is still quite important. But for us as a program and as a company, we were quite fortunate the pandemic didn't actually impact us as much as I thought it would have, because of the ability for us to work remotely with the customer and resolve a lot of the challenges that were both contractual as well as service delivery, and the fact that they allowed us to continue our work at the facility. So that was quite responsive from both the user and the customer community to allow us to do that. Without that dispensation, then there will have been a massive impact, because we couldn't have done the work we needed to keep the lights on in the facility, because we can't be on site. But despite that, there were challenges, because there were loads of different restrictions, both on site in terms of some of the COVID safety procedures we have to follow. And so the number of people that can be in each room or each of the station has to be limited, and all of the cleansing and observing the safety rules need to be in place to allow that to happen. But despite all of that, we were really fortunate. We were still able to push through and be able to deliver what the customer needed. But equally, we have seen delays in other programs as we are interacting with other areas, and we have noticed, either meetings have to slip because of inability for staff to travel, or the inability to join certain conferences and video conferences and such like. So that has added delay, and also exchange of information became a lot slower in some areas because staff wasn't able to get into where they needed to generate the information that is needed by other parties, because either the facility is closed or has limited access due to COVID safety and the pandemic. But overall, I think for us in the E3D program, we have been very fortunate, and with the customer being very understanding, the user being understanding, and us working quite flexibly with them, we have been able to push through a lot of the challenges and be able to deliver the services to the customer, and still continue to do so despite a lot of the lockdown being lifted, but there's still some restrictions in place.
Quite, that's great. Thanks very much. And as you pointed out there is no substitute for face-to-face communications. The overwhelming support from both industry, from delegations, and from the Ministry of Defence was to have a live DSEI in September as we emerge out of this pandemic. Because unless you are face-to-face, you're never going to get the full picture and establish and build relationships. I mean, talking of the full picture, well, here we are in the virtual world. You don't know whether I've got shorts on or whether I've got trousers on. I have got shorts on, I'll admit that here and now. But you don't get that. You don't get the full picture in this virtual world. But, and there's a question coming to you now, Russ Matt, and I'll be really keen to get Alex's thoughts on it afterwards. Unfortunately, it's going to be the last question. And we've learned a lot from online webinars, online conferences. Have we, though, really adapted and adopted enough from the MS&T community to bring them in, to bring some of the demonstrations in, to make the conferences more interactive and the webinars in terms of demonstration? And when we look to the future now, accepting what I've just said, can we continue in a hybrid role, physical and virtual? Where do some of those dragons lie, and what's probably the best way to navigate forward? Russ, Matt, I'll be delighted to hear your views, and then maybe Alex, I'll come to you afterwards to get your perspective, and then we'll probably just have to wrap up this half of it.
I might come across as incredibly old-fashioned and a technology skeptic, which I do not think I am, but I don't think, and I haven't seen from anybody I've asked, and I've asked a lot of people, a successful hybrid event or online event that has the character of being there for real. I don't think, despite anything that I've been involved in from my company or in other companies and organizations, there's an online event that anywhere near captures the richness and interaction that you get. Now, Alex and River's quite inspiring what they do. We are getting there, but we are not there yet. Will hybrid be a part of it? Absolutely. It could be that, there are hybrid events and then there are just real people events. And I see like the gate, you earn the right to go to live training. You kind of earn the right through your hybrid events. You know enough about it, and your boss says, yes, you can go. You know what you're doing. You're not just going there for a beer. Go off to that live event. And that's how I see that kind of mixture of the two.
Russ, Matt, of course, this webinar will be the exception to your rule, of course. Alex, your views?
Yeah, definitely. There's going to be, I am a little bit different on my views with Russ, Matt, obviously, but we've been doing virtual events. I think there will be a place for real events because I love them. I love walking around, speaking to real people, touching the real technology. You're never going to beat that. But when you say about a virtual event now, I always ask the question, is that in VR or are we going to be on a 2D screen? Because that is what I want to know straight away. Because it is available now. It is a thing that you can do. It's just something that not everyone is up for doing. It's not the norm yet, but it's the norm for everyone to have this in their hand. Absolutely the norm now, and much more the norm for the 2D conversation to happen like this. And this will still happen just more regularly than it used to do. But then now at an event, we're going to be filming 360 and 3D content and using different lenses from big manufacturers that are releasing immersive lenses. So we're going to be filming the events, either streaming them live or having them as a post event for people to look at. That'll be like a way for you to interact with your customers, but you'll still have the ability to have a virtual presence in a VR world post event. So after iTech, we will have a scan of the iTech area that you can go and visit afterwards with things to do on the stand. You'll be able to interact and watch the videos and pick up the flyers and everything that you did at the real show. But it's there persistently in the cloud forever on WebXR. This is going to be what everyone will have soon, is an experience. There's a www. Visit that on a browser window of any VR headset. Forget about all these stores and gatekeepers. It's going to be, give me a browser window inside a VR headset, and now you can go into that company, to that training event, to that experience. So it's going to move really fast, and people will just be shocked at first, but then it will just slowly pick up like mobile phones. That's my very quick view.
So Alex, that's a great segue actually into the second part of this, was where we're going to look ahead into iTech. Quark and Richard, thank you so much for your contribution to the first part. Please hang around just to listen to where we're going now on this journey into iTech 22. As Jim Robb highlighted at the start, iTech 22 has had a slightly troublesome birth, and back in, I guess it was iTech 19 or 20, we appointed 20, which we appointed the chairman, Russ Mohammed, just to see through one evolution. Well, the chairperson stayed because we've had to postpone, and now we're looking forward clearly to iTech 22 in April at the Excel Centre. And Russ Mohammed, perhaps if I can just hand over to you and your role of chairperson, just to give us a bit of a hint of the journey we've been on, how we've set and why we've set the theme and what underpins it into next year.
Gladly. I'd just like to take a 30-second aside to say that behind someone like me as chair, or next year another chair, both for iTech and ISEC, there are large committees of industry people or government or academics. And they support very hardworking Clarion and NTSA teams. I think as an industry, we're very well served by the companies and by the committees, who put a huge amount of expertise and work to curate and form the themes of these. The reason I say that is, if that sounds appealing to you, please reach out to Clarion, please reach out to me, please reach out to NTSA, because we are always looking for people who would love to come on the committee. And we do get occasional unsolicited applications, which we're really happy to receive. So if it appeals to you, if you want to be there for iTech 2022, 2023 or ISEC, please do go ahead, and you'll be here talking about the future. So with the committee members and Clarion, we looked a couple of years ago at what was coming. And I remember going to Heathrow Airport in London, Terminal 5, and there was a poster which really surprised me at the time, showing a huge petrochemical work on the Rhine, but it was a digital twin. It was a complete digital replication of that. So 2 years ago, you saw digital twins coming to every part of the world and starting to come into training. And that was the theme of last year. Now, I think these digital twins, and I think you'll see, are even more embedded than before. So we've had to update the themes. Digital twinning is still one of the themes, but now AI and machine learning has been integrated with that, so you get even more power than before. And with power comes great responsibility and ethics. I say that for any politicians listening. Everyone reads in the newspapers about algorithms and biases in algorithms, unconscious bias in algorithms, ethics, and so on. And some of the, you'll just need to pick up a newspaper to find some of the strange results that are happening. So I will just say that things like trust, understanding of the AI and algorithms, and learning how to use them are key. So I'm generally more excited by emerging solutions. For ITech 2022, I'm really excited by the understanding, the human ability to understand, work with, and trust AI. And also, in the future, I think we're just going to start hitting on this. How do we train, machine learning is trained. How do we train machine learning? How do we train machines? And how do we train people and machines together? These are the kind of things that we're going to be looking at. We're working papers on, and you will soon see a call for papers for that. So if you've got up-to-date experience and some strong ideas on that, we'd like to hear them.
Russ, definitely. I think you're on your first point. The depth and the breadth of experience and help and support that sits on the committee on this side and all sides of the pond, I've just found quite remarkable. It's an area that continues to make my head hurt on a regular basis because it encourages you to think deeply about where we're going and how we're going in the future. Your point about machine learning, about AI, not lost on me, and I was involved in a podcast only last week actually, and one of the discussion points there was about allowing the AI to gather momentum and pace of its own. You talked about making sure on the ethics side. Of course, we're already doing this in many areas. You have to look no further, I guess, than the F-35 fighter, where you're in a typhoon era, you would have all of the sensors delivering you answers to the question of the threat that was out there. And you would be responsible for looking across the sea of all those sensors and deciding whether it was friend or foe and what action to take. You move into the 5th gen era, and all of those sensors are then knitting themselves together through algorithms and presenting you with what it believes is the right answer. So we're already going down there, but ultimately what you've still got is you have the decision maker in the loop at the right time to make that decision. And I think as we step down that road, I think we need to tread very carefully, but it's a road we will tread down, because that's the only way to exploit the masses and masses of data that's out there, to put them in the right place at the right time, to allow the decision maker. I even had a question the other day which called into question the law of armed conflict, rule of engagement going forward. Well, that's here to stay, and that's here to stay for the very right reasons. But it's how to simplify some of that decision making. And I think then leading back into our world is how we look at the world of the digital twinning, how we look at exploitation, so we can train faster and faster to enable and prepare decision makers on a quicker pace. But Russ, thank you for that. That's really good in terms of where we're going next year. I'm really excited by it, and I know the call for papers is going out very soon. Alex, can I perhaps come to you? So the tech partner for ITech is River, which we're really excited about in 22. And you guys, you're the world leading developer when it comes to VR assets and experiences. Your unique kind of simulation engine, you talked about scanning real world to give us immersive training wherever it is. Can you just unpack a little bit of what you think we're going to see? Maybe talk about Distech. What's going to be really vibrant when we get to this real show in Excel in April next year?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I think we talked about the pandemic again, but it's just going to be compounded even more when we get to this show in April, and we're going to be showing things then that I think have moved on so much more than I thought would happen in 2 years. But yeah, we're the technology partner, and that means that for iTech, like we had planned those years ago, we've got 8 different areas that we're putting together with different immersive experiences from different people, including obviously our own. We'll have fire investigation and crime scene investigation that we've developed specifically for standalone headsets. So you're now, just touching on the crime scene investigation one, you're now inside a crime house. I've been to multiple crime houses and seen what they do. So we're basically copying the real world training places and making photorealistic replicas of them, and then giving the people all the props they need. So all the weapons, all the bodies, all the blood stains and things that you need to make in a crime house. We give you that inside virtual reality, and then we give you the multiplayer ability, so we can all be in the house together. And we lay the body on the bed, we put the arm to the side and we drip a bit of blood, we turn the lights off and we turn the tap on. You set the scene as you want and you basically press save as. Like, that is as simple as it needs to be. When we talk about training, I get really into it because I think e-learning or anything that is not physically, spatially moving around the world is not proper training. It's not hands-on, it's not real. There's different levels of, but when you can make that, why wouldn't you make that? So we're giving people the ability to do the crime scenes and make their own, and that's one of the new releases from us. But at iTech, we're going to show all different types. So people will have seen the things from Flame and the things that Paul Spate have been doing with the UK Fire Service. And also Avert, the guys that have been doing taser training, shooting. They're going to be there. So there's going to be loads of things to get hands-on. I'm very much for showing people how it's being used now. We've had Sir Thomas Windsor from Her Majesty's Inspectorate come and have a go on our virtual solutions multiple times. We had the pleasure of having a nice letter from him saying how pleased he was. But he is massively pushing VR with his inspectors of police stations and fire stations around the UK. He's now asking the question, if you're not using virtual reality now, why not? It's not a question anymore of whether it works or not. This works, so why aren't you using it? And if you're not yet, we can help you discuss that. But yeah, we're going to get hands-on at iTech, and I'm very much in the mode of showing things that are being used rather than talking about tech that's coming. I definitely do that as well. We like to talk about that, but for this show, we're going to show you what's actually being used out there in the market.
Alex, that's great, thanks. And just really to finish up from me in terms of iTech 22, I think what excites me most about this, because I'm definitely a sort of a practical sort of person, despite we're talking about synthetics and AR, etc., is the technology lounge. Because technology lounge is going to give hands-on experience. You're going to be able to wear the technology. You're going to be able to look at the virtual, the augmented reality, AI, machine learning, cognitive enhancement, the whole lot. And it's going to be there to show people. And as much as you can do this in this sort of in a virtual domain, getting people on the floor, getting people to wear it themselves, I think is going to be really key. And to see some of these live demos and tickles people's senses about, this isn't where the future's going to be. This is where we are in the future today.
Yes, and we're definitely saying to people, come and try it, because there's a lot of confusion around what training can be, whether that's e-learning or virtual reality or 360 video. And by coming to that technology lounge at iTech, you will have the ability to see an array of different solutions. And I hope that by leaving there, you'll just have an understanding more of 3 degrees of freedom and 6 degrees of freedom virtual reality compared to traditional training.
Yeah, Alex, that is great. Hey, gents, unfortunately, in time to allow people to visit the restroom or to grab a beverage, we're going to have to draw stumps there. Can I just thank all 4 of you sincerely? Both parts have been really rich and rewarding. As ever, I learn far more than I ever feel I contribute to these discussions. I think what we all passionately agree about is the world of modelling simulation is marching full steam ahead, unabated by the pandemic. In fact, enhanced by the pandemic. And we're now going to pick through the goodness, and we're just going to keep the accelerant going to provide increased technology quicker than we have done before. And the only however is there is still no no replacement for working in a real environment for the personal connections. Alex, I actually hear everything you say, but regards to that, actually getting together, forming a bond of friendship, professional friendship, personal friendship, to then allow you to work effectively in the virtual domain. Hence the reason that IT2EC will be there in April. I look forward to seeing all you there, and actually some of those that are out watching and listening. So with that, gentlemen, thank you very much. I really appreciate the conversation. Jim, back to you.
Okay, Gary, thank you. And thanks to the wonderful panel you put together. It was really an exciting hour, and I learned a lot. That's good. I think the constant themes that everyone has expressed about acceleration and interconnectivity, convergence, and the whole idea that potentially all types of virtual reality, augmented, and XR are really moving forward very fast. So I've been doing this about 10 years, and the first 6 or 7 we were talking about it a lot. In the last 3, there's been a lot happening, and I would give you one contract on the United States side, which was a $22 billion contract with Microsoft to provide VR/XR type capabilities to the Army. I mean, that's a lot of money. So when we see real activity and real use cases, we find great things happen. And I think that the I believe button has been pushed on certainly on the U.S. service side, and I'm sure on the UK side, and we just continue to propone for use of these technologies where it's appropriate, and it's not trying to replace live training. It's trying to augment it and build up to it and make it better and collect data and improve human performance. So this is all a great discussion, and we look forward to all that you talked about coming to IT2EC, maybe showing up on the ITSEC show floor in November. So I think that I just wanted to highlight that ITSEC is in 30 November, and it's going to be live. So we are dedicated to live. We are going to power through whatever. We are bringing some of the best of breed from the virtual world, mainly in recording activity. People seem to like the fact that they could go back and see things. And we will bring into the convention center as much as we need to in terms of content from the outside, depending on the COVID. But we're going to be there in force, and we're going to toast to the next chapter and getting together. And I appreciate your comments about in person as that goes. For us, our September activity for the webinar series is going to be a recap of IFEST, which is next week. IFEST is a science of learning activity that we do with the Advanced Distributed Lab with OSD, and it's an education, workforce development kind of thing. So it's really well thought of, and it's a part of our mission that's very important. So Gary, I congratulate you on this. I wish you well on DSEI. I know that your predecessor was 24/7 for about a week in terms of on the stage. So if you're picking up all that, look out. And it's a great event. Yeah. So with that, I will thank you again, and thanks to the attendees. Remember that this is going to be recorded, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.